I'll prove that you're the culprit.
It was my father-in-law, Connolly, who was glaring at me and intimidating me with his loud voice. He had come home early and appeared in front of me with noisy footsteps. Ever since I started living in my in-laws' house, whenever Connolly gets angry, his voice can always be heard up to the second floor of the house. I hate this voice that I can hear even when I cover my ears and it doesn't stop.
Listen up. If you're the culprit, I'll call the police.
He treats me like a criminal and thinks he's always right.
Apologize quickly. If you do, your crime will be a little lighter.
My husband, Elliot, who continues to believe his parents' story over mine and does as they say.
If you tell the truth now, I'll forgive you. So please apologize.
My mother-in-law, Caddy, who has no real power in this house, but still talks down to me. No matter how much I care about this family, I'm reminded that I'm ultimately an outsider. This family thinks I'm a criminal. However, even in a hopeless situation, I can't acknowledge what I can't acknowledge. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't done anything to be ashamed of. Even if no one believes me, I can't bend my own beliefs. If they can prove it, then let them prove it. Who is the one who has truly done something shameful?
I understand. Then I will also prove my innocence.
I'm Vivian, a 27-year-old housewife. My husband Elliot, who is the same age as me, is training every day to become a pastry chef. Elliot's family runs a pastry shop. When there's a celebration, it's this shop's pastries. And it's a shop that locals say. It's a pastry shop that Elliot's grandfather started, and it has many long-time customers. In order to become the third-generation owner, Elliot is working hard every day under Connolly. Elliot and I met 7 years ago. At the time, I was attending a vocational school to become a hairdresser and was invited by a friend to a party. Among the bright and talkative male college students, Elliot was the one who was quietly drinking while staring at his glass. I wondered if he was shy, so I asked, "Are you from the same university as everyone else?" And he,
"No, I'm actually in vocational school,"
replied. "I'm in vocational school too. Because my dream was to become a hairdresser."
I have no choice, but now that I've decided to do it, I'm going to do my best.
I see.
But it's wonderful that you're trying to work hard. By the way, is there something about that glass that caught your attention? You've been staring at it for a while.
Since I make pastries, I was wondering how they create such a mysterious color combination. The glass that Elliot had been staring at indeed had a mysterious color, with blue and red mixing together. When I heard vocational school, I had selfishly imagined cosmetology. Pastries. I'm sorry, I selfishly assumed it was cosmetology. So I was surprised and apologized.
No worries. Most people assume cosmetology when I say vocational school, so I'm used to it.
I see. But being a pastry chef is wonderful. Pastries have depth and stories. I really like them.
Thank you. Please do try them sometime.
Perhaps he was a bit embarrassed, but I couldn't see Elliot's expression at all as he spoke while looking down.
Yes. I'm looking forward to it.
But even though I said that, I'm sure he was offended that I had mistaken him for a cosmetology student. I thought we would never meet again. However, he actually made pastries for me and brought them to my vocational school. When I opened the pastry box that he had brought, pale pink flower-shaped pastries emerged from inside. It was as if flower petals blooming in front of where we were sitting had fluttered down.
Beautiful.
The words slipped out unintentionally. Thank you. And Elliot replied shyly.
Vivian, I might be awkward with words and not very interesting, but if it's all right with you, could we continue meeting from now on?
It was a sudden invitation, but I didn't feel uncomfortable. From then on, with each passing season, Elliot would gift me colorful pastries. And when we both got jobs, on the third spring, he proposed to me with a flower ring made of.
I want us to always be together, so please marry me.
I had always wanted to be by the sincere his side, so I answered without hesitation.
Thank you. Let's always be together.
When you say a family that runs a business, it gives the impression of being formal and strict, but his parents.
Vivian, thank you for coming today.
Caddy, who smiled amiably, had a kind aura and the pale yellow dress suited her well.
Don't be nervous.
We're the ones who are more nervous. Connolly, who laughed heartily, had the aura of a true artisan.
It's an old shop.
Young people these days might not like it, but we're running it modestly.
If you'd like, please try the pastries I made.
Then Connolly said as he offered them to me. Unlike the pastries that he makes, these had a sense of dignity that came through even in the sweets.
Thank you for the food.
The pastries that he made had a flavor that went well with coffee, giving the impression of truly old-fashioned pastries.
Caddy also helps out in the store, but I wonder if we could ask Vivian to help out a bit after the wedding?
To be honest, I liked my job as a hairdresser and didn't want to quit. However, my desire to be with Elliot was stronger.
Yes, I would be happy to help out while learning from Caddy.
And so, I began living with my in-laws and occasionally helping out at the store. After our wedding, a pastry boom occurred among young people. A drama about pastry chefs was broadcast on TV, and young aspiring chefs even came to my in-laws' store. It was a small shop, but a TV crew even came to cover it. I thought that Elliot's pastries might be more suited for young people, and wondered if Elliot should be the one interviewed, but it was Connolly who was interviewed instead of him. Before long, the young customers gradually dwindled. The youth boom disappeared in an instant, like a match flame going out. Along with the fading boom, sales at my in-laws' pastry shop decreased. Not only that, even the regular customers from before were starting to leave. It was because there were times when the pastries they wanted were sold out due to the influx of young people. A low-priced pastry shop also opened nearby, with various pastries displayed in the storefront, causing sales to plummet.
Let's make new products that the pastry shop over there can't make,
Elliot suggested, and they tried test-selling a few, but the results were not promising. Because of that, the atmosphere at my in-laws' home was getting worse day by day.
It's because a pastry shop like that opened up nearby.
Even my in-laws, who had never said anything negative before, only complained and grumbled whenever they opened their mouths. Elliot also stopped coming up. They won't sell anyway. With new products, saying. Hoping they would persevere, I used the internet and every information network I could to think of ways to advertise the pastries without spending money. Then, an online post caught my eye. Pastry contest. The content was about making pastries that go well with coffee and deciding on a winner. I immediately printed it out at home and ran to the store where my in-laws and Elliot were.
Elliot! Connolly! Caddy! Look at this!
When I showed them the contest information, all three of them stared at it intently. Their faces brightened.
This could be great advertising.
And Connolly said,
Vivian, thank you. I'll also compete with my pastries.
Elliot said, his face filled with motivation for the first time in a while. From then on, both Connolly and Elliot continued making pastries every day. And on the day of the contest, I was surprised to see the pastries they showed me with confidence.
This is...
Did you notice?
I was originally thinking of making something new, but I ended up going with the flower ring I used to propose to Vivian.
The gold representing the color and light of the flower was shining. It was a special pastry for me, and I was happy that Elliot chose this pastry for the contest.
And Connolly's is.
When I peeked inside the box, there were the cakes and cookies that I had first been treated to.
Whenever I entertain someone, I always go with these, so I'll compete with them.
Confidence emanated from Connolly's face. These pastries were filled with Connolly's unique style. I also thought these pastries were great. I felt like they could win an award in the contest. I sent the two of them off with a prayerful feeling. As I waited for their return, Caddy said to me with full confidence as I clasped my hands in anxiety, I'm sure at least one of them will win an award, so don't worry. And tension. Caddy and I prepared a feast and waited for Elliot and Connolly to return. Even though the awards ceremony for the contest was at 3 p.m., there was no contact even after 8 p.m. passed. Caddy said, "Maybe they're out drinking to celebrate?" But neither of them answered their phones. I became worried and was about to consult the police when the front door of my in-laws' house opened. The two of them seemed drunk. As soon as he got home,
There, a nightmare is here,"
Connolly said to me. Seeing this,
"Don't tell me it went badly?"
Caddy said in astonishment.
"What? It went completely badly. The technique, the appearance, everything,"
Connolly said loudly while tapping the wall.
"It's because of this person that we were utterly humiliated. We shouldn't have entered that thing. It was a waste of time. Even the judges don't know anything about pastries. We shouldn't have listened to what this person said."
He pointed at me and said it over and over again.
"Let's drink some more. Elliot, join me,"
he said and sat down in the living room of my in-laws' house, deliberately making loud noises, and started drinking with Elliot. Even after drinking, his anger didn't seem to subside.
"It's because an amateur like you tried to tell us what to do. Our store sales have dropped since you came. You demon. Your presence makes the alcohol taste bad, so get lost."
He directed his anger at me. At first, I tried to convey my own feelings, saying,
"I really love both of your pastries. That's why I recommended the contest."
But no matter what I said,
"Shut up. You're probably laughing on the inside. You're an outsider after all."
he wouldn't listen to me. Eventually, "Could you go home? His mood won't improve with you here," Caddy also started saying. Even when Elliot saw me being subjected to Connolly's abusive language, he didn't stand up for me or make his presence known. Seeing his behavior, I thought that no matter what I said to Connolly today, it wouldn't get through to him. "I'll excuse myself for today," I said and left my in-laws' house. But our house was a two-family home, so I just went upstairs to the second floor. I could still hear his loud voice whether I liked it or not.
"Why did you marry a wife like that? You don't have to force yourself. Why don't you divorce her and remarry someone like your mom? Our longtime customers still favor us, so we can manage without participating in contests like that."
I crawled into bed as if to block out his voice, but I could still faintly hear it. At the same time, the sound of my own heartbeat echoed, and I couldn't fall asleep for a while. Unable to calm down, I spent time listening to the radio through earphones. The abusive words directed at me that I could hear through the earphones gradually disappeared little by little, and I started hearing laughter. Compared to the person who had said such abusive things to me now laughing, it felt so empty and sad to be listening to Connolly's voice through earphones. At 2 a.m., Elliot also returned to our room, and the long day ended. From that day onward, my in-laws' attitude towards me changed. When I helped out at the store, they would say in front of regular customers, "Sorry that our son's wife is so inattentive," or mock me, saying, "You probably still can't understand the excellence of these pastries." Caddy would say things like, "Elliot's childhood friend Malia is pregnant with her second child. What about you two, still no children? Is there something wrong with you?" And Connolly would say, "Even if my son's wife is good for nothing, I at least want to see a grandchild. We'll be in trouble if you don't give birth to a successor for this store. Why don't you go to the hospital?" They started making snide remarks about us not having children yet. I myself wanted children, so my heart ached every time they said those things. I went to the hospital for a consultation. They only advised me to not accumulate stress. But they couldn't figure out the factors making it difficult to have children. I racked my brain every day trying to figure out how to improve this situation. When I consulted with relatives, "I'll let people around me know," they said. Fortunately, many of my relatives were self-employed, and they said they would use the pastries as treats for customers who came to their stores. When I met up with friends and brought Elliot's pastries as a gift, "I'll advertise them for you, Vivian," they said. The one who said that was Jaylene, my childhood friend who is now a popular violinist. She was always cheerful and has been my #1 ally since we were little. Jaylene was the only one I could confide in about worries that I couldn't talk to my parents about. When I talk to her, any worry feels like a small matter. She has that mysterious effect. I'll try introducing them on social media. Even someone like me has fans, so I'm sure they'll buy them. I was saved by Jaylene's smiling face as she said that. I used to go to my former workplace once a month to get my hair cut, so I asked them to buy pastries during those times. The easygoing manager's eyes clouded over for a moment.
But you know, we have a lot of young people here, so I'm not sure if advertising will work." "I understand. But I think even young people will like this beautiful appearance and delicious taste." As I made an impassioned speech, the manager also said, "All right, I got it. Fine. Nowadays, it's all about whether it's Instagrammable on social media, right?" They agreed to put a small model of the pastries on the storefront and place pamphlets. Indeed, in this day and age, it's all about social media. Both my best friend and the manager said so. I also have some knowledge about social media, so this might lead to a recovery in the store's sales. With that thought, as soon as I got home, I immediately started preparing by editing photos for social media and thinking of advertising slogans. I had Elliot take a look when he got home, and we started advertising right away. As we introduced a menu tailored for younger customers, the store gradually started to attract new patrons. We began receiving regular orders from relatives, and even customers from the beauty salon where I used to work started dropping by. The day after my best friend promoted the store on social media, I updated our store's advertisement. I saw it on Instagram and wanted to try it out, so I came by. And we saw an increase in customers saying, our sales slowly started to recover, and our revenue reached a break-even point compared to before the contest. Just as I thought we were on the path to profitability, there were more and more days where the sales numbers didn't add up. The discrepancy started at $1, but gradually increased from $10 and eventually ballooned to $100. At first, I thought it might have been an order mix-up, but it was unlikely for there to be a $100 difference, and suspicions arose that I might be stealing the money. "Vivian, do you really not know anything about this?"
Caddy pressed me for answers. "There's no point in pretending to work hard to boost sales if you're just pocketing the money yourself." Connolly had already decided that I was the thief.
"If you're short on cash, just tell us."
Even my in-laws were casting doubt on me. Initially, I tried to explain. I didn't take anything. But faced with the reality that no one believed me, I felt empty and lost my words.
"The fact that you're not even denying it is proof enough."
With that, I was branded as a thief. Even so, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, so I endured it, believing that the truth would come to light eventually. Then one day, after finishing work at home, I heard loud footsteps. The door to our room on the second floor burst open.
"Get downstairs right now!"
And Connolly shouted with a demonic expression. Startled, I turned off the stove and immediately descended the stairs to the living room of my in-laws' house. Elliot and Caddy were already there.
"Sit there."
I did as I was told and sat next to Elliot. Connolly said,
"I've got evidence. We'll find out who the thief is now. If the facts are confirmed, I'm turning you over to the police."
With heavy breathing. I had no idea what he was talking about, and as I remained silent, Elliot spoke up.
"Of course, if you've been stealing, it's embezzlement. Let's call the police."
Elliot looked at me as he said it. It seemed that even Elliot thought I had stolen the money.
"Yesterday, when I checked the safe after closing, the numbers didn't add up again. So, I install the camera to make the culprit confess to their crime. What?
I was surprised that Connolly, who was so technologically inept that he couldn't even record TV shows, had set up a camera by himself. Caddy and Elliot also seemed surprised, as they weren't aware of it either. Come to think of it, Caddy and Elliot had gone out shopping yesterday, so I was the only one at home.
This morning, when I checked the contents of the safe again, more money was missing. No one else entered the store, so the only possibility is that you, who was in this house, stole it.
Connolly was making a passionate speech, as if he were the protagonist of a detective drama.
Then you should have talked to me about it first,
Elliot said.
I was going to tell you and Caddy, but she was nearby, so I couldn't say anything. I was worried she might overhear, hide the evidence, and run away.
It's true that the circumstantial evidence was piling up, but I didn't do it.
I didn't do it. I've been working hard in my own way to contribute to increasing the store's profits. I would never steal money from the precious store.
You still won't admit it?
You're a persistent woman.
Connolly seemed to want me to confess, but this was no joke. I hadn't fallen so low as to commit a crime.
Vivian, if you did it, just apologize properly. It's not something that can be forgiven, but denying it despite all this circumstantial evidence is unsightly.
Even Elliot, who should have seen me working hard at home to promote the store on social media, didn't believe me. The emptiness I felt slowly turned into anger. If that's how it was going to be, I would see for myself if it was really true.
Fine. Let's watch the video. If I'm on it, you can call the police or do whatever you want. I'll apologize or do anything. You think you won't be on it? You persistent woman. I bet you think you acted in a way that wouldn't be caught on camera. But this camera captures faces clearly even in the dark. Prepare yourself.
As Connolly and I argued, Caddy intervened.
Honey, you don't need to go that far, do you? Exposing her in front of everyone. Vivian, if you apologize honestly, I'll forgive you. So please, apologize.
She had never stood up for me before. Caddy always did whatever Connolly said. Perhaps she felt sorry for me, as I had never raised my voice like this before.
No. Caddy, if I'm on that camera, I have nothing to be troubled about. Let's all watch it together right here. But in exchange, if I'm not on it, you have to stop suspecting me from now on. All right? Let's see it then, you thief.
Saying that, Connolly operated the TV remote. The usual store interior appeared on the screen. As expected, it was dark and hard to see clearly. Caddy, who usually remained silent until Connolly started talking, was the first to speak up. It's too dark to see anything. Maybe the camera placement was bad? Let's check the lighting positions and set up the camera again.
No, I made sure this position would work.
Connolly wouldn't listen. In the darkness, someone appeared in the store. Without hesitation, they headed straight for the safe and opened it.
All right, here it comes.
Connolly stared intently at the screen.
I wish it was a bit brighter.
The face wasn't clearly visible in the darkness.
I'm pretty sure this video camera has an automatic low-light correction feature that should make the person's face clearly visible after a little while.
Indeed, the screen was gradually getting brighter.
What?
The camera's brightness correction must have finished. The focus sharpened, and even in the darkness, the face became clearly visible.
You! Why?
Mom. On the screen was Caddy, holding money in her hand and about to close the safe. When she turned around, Caddy's face was pale, and she opened her mouth, making a soundless cry. Connolly's face, which had been dumbfounded, turned bright red, and once again transformed into a demonic expression.
You were the one stealing? Why would you do something like this?
Collapsing to her knees on the spot, curling up into a small ball. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Caddy just kept apologizing through her tears. I was appalled by this exchange and said, "Shall I call the police?" As I picked up the phone, Caddy clung to my feet.
Anything but that,
she begged, sobbing.
What do you want to do?
Should I call the police? I asked again, but
no, wait,
Connolly said.
Vivian, this is a problem between them, so.
Elliot chimed in. Just a few minutes ago, they had been calling me a criminal and hurling abuse at me, but now my in-laws looked utterly dejected. I simply said, "I'm tired," and returned to my own home. The next day, Elliot showed some awkwardness but didn't bring up yesterday's events. Caddy was apparently bedridden, so I went to the store, but Connolly didn't say anything either. I was appalled that they couldn't even apologize after accusing someone else and treating them like a criminal. Before Elliot and Connolly came home, I got the divorce papers and filled them out. I also efficiently packed my belongings. When Elliot and Connolly returned, I said, just like that day, "Elliot, Connolly, please sit here." The two obediently sat down in the living room of my in-laws' house. I couldn't see her, but Caddy could probably hear me too. I began to speak in a slightly louder voice.
"Elliot, I want a divorce. I'm leaving this house today. I will also properly claim compensation for the emotional harassment I received from Connolly in this house and the defamation I suffered from being treated as a suspect yesterday. Please be aware of this."
They were dumbfounded by my matter-of-fact speech.
Wait a minute. Compensation. Can't you reconsider somehow?
If I had felt that he needed me even a little emotionally, I might have reconsidered the divorce. But it seemed that the only thing on Elliot's mind was the payment of compensation.
No, if Vivian leaves, we'll lose our business connections and the effect of social media. The store will go under. I can't have a divorce.
If he had reflected on his past actions and apologized, I might have reconsidered a bit. But it appeared that this Connolly, too, only had the store's profits on his mind. Both of them were only thinking about themselves. I turned my back on the two of them as they desperately tried to stop me, left my in-laws' house, and returned to my parents' home. My parents were surprised by their daughter's sudden return, but when I explained the situation, they were outraged. I hadn't told them anything until now to avoid worrying them, so it must have been quite a shock. Feeling the presence of people who would get angry for my sake for the first time in a long time, I regained my composure. After my parents spoke to our relatives, the regular orders to the store at my parents' home were immediately stopped. I also told Jaylene, the violinist who had promoted the store on social media, "I'm sorry, even though you helped me out," saying, "Vivian, you've been through a lot." She comforted me. "And I'll be playing your favorite song on the radio today, so be sure to listen." Then she said, "That's right." Today was the day Jaylene's violin music would be broadcast on the radio. For the first time in a long time, I could listen to the radio peacefully, not to escape Connolly's nagging. By chance, the song that played was the same one I had listened to on my earphones on the day of the contest. With the gentle music filling the room, I felt like I had been freed from years of shackles. When I went to my former workplace, the beauty salon, to express my gratitude and apologies for everything up until now, the manager said,
"In that case, why don't you come work here again?"
inviting me back. I'm truly happy to be able to work at the beauty salon again. Wanting to finalize the divorce quickly, I sought out a law firm. Although I only have memories I'd rather not recall, as I was talking to the lawyer, Elliot called at an inconvenient time. "Vivian, won't you come back? Actually, Mom was kicked out of the house. Apparently, the reason Mom was stealing money was because she was going to bars to relieve stress. She originally liked young men, so even though Dad made her stop going out and she said she had quit, she thought no one would notice if she made it seem like you had stolen the money, so she would steal cash and go to see young guys. Can you believe it? But listen, without Mom, We can't keep the store running and we're in trouble. Please help. Even at this point, Elliot was still trying to manipulate me for their own benefit. I have no intention of going back. Shall I take over the call? The lawyer offered.
Yes, please.
And I said, the lawyer, from now on, I will be representing Vivian, so please refrain from contacting her directly. Clearly stated. Thanks to that, even Elliot, who had been reluctant to agree to the divorce, grudgingly consented, and the divorce was successfully finalized. As for the compensation, it was acknowledged that I had suffered emotional distress, and they agreed to pay. After returning to my former workplace and working as a beautician, I hear various stories from customers. Apparently, my in-laws' pastry shop ultimately couldn't continue operating and went bankrupt. Elliot and Connolly are working part-time to make ends meet while paying off the massive debts from the pastry shop, and they look exhausted whenever I see them, according to regular customers at the salon. Meanwhile, Caddy was kicked out of my in-laws' house and is living alone in an apartment, but it seems she still can't quit going to bars.
That's her way of escaping reality, I guess.
I hear her debts have also ballooned quite a bit. The neighbors of my in-laws were gossiping about it. I'm now able to listen to such stories as if they're someone else's problem, living peacefully each day. Ever since I started cutting their hair, my parents are delighted to be told they look younger. Now, I feel happiness in my daily life, being able to please others and receive their smiles.
I need you to leave. Fine, I'll leave the house.
Polly, my stepdaughter, without looking at me, her eyes fixed on her mobile phone as she speaks.
Make sure you clean up your room.
Rachel, the woman my husband had an affair with, gives me a triumphant glance.
You need to leave by tomorrow. And make sure to take all your belongings with you.
First thing I did was to call the junk removal service, arranging for their arrival the next morning.
You said everything, right? I'll make sure it's all taken care of.
I whispered, smirking to myself. My name is Olivia. I'm a graphic designer who once worked at a major advertising agency but now run my own studio, accepting freelance work. My husband Vince is 5 years my junior, a businessman working in new product development for a large candy manufacturer. Although we had gone out a few times for meals through work while I was at the agency, I never felt a clear romantic interest, partly because Vince was younger. However, how Vince asked me out moved me, and we began dating when I was 31. Vince and I found joy in our shared hobbies and laughed at the same things, making our relationship fulfilling. Our mutual love for walks helped bring our hearts even closer. Our healthy relationship lasted for 2 years, and then Vince proposed to me. I was truly shocked at the time. I was 33 and unsure if I was really the right choice for him. After he proposed, I found out Vince had a child. I was shocked. Why hadn't he told me sooner? It wasn't something that could be hidden forever, and I started to wonder if Vince was dishonest. These thoughts crossed my mind. Vince tearfully explained he thought I wouldn't accept the marriage if I knew about the child.
I love you so much, I just have to marry you.
I cried too, but honestly, I felt Vince was being unfair. Because I loved Vince, I struggled with the decision but ultimately accepted the marriage proposal. Vince's parents, Wally and Shannon, didn't care about my age at all, they were just happy about the marriage based on my character. After getting married, we decided to live together at my home office. I didn't want to change the office address, and it was spacious enough. Above all, it was my favorite place. Vince was kind to me, and our marriage was happy except for one thing. That was how cold Vince's stepdaughter, Polly, was towards me. She hardly warmed up to me at all. Vince didn't worry about it. Eventually, we'll get along. If we have a brother or sister for her, things might change. But there were no signs of pregnancy for me. 7 years into our marriage, when I turned 40, I stopped preconception care. By then, Vince and I had given up on having children. Don't worry about it. Vince would say so, but he seemed to regret it quite a bit. He loved kids and he would often say so over drinks.
I had imagined having one girl and two boys. I'd love a boy next to play catch with.
I'd love a boy next to play catch with. Polly seemed to dislike discussions about children, and whenever Vince would start talking about having another child, she'd retreat to her room. Even without this, Polly and I hardly ever spoke. And this only made our relationship colder. When we told Wally and Shannon, they said, it can't be helped. But they were probably disappointed. They lived in the countryside, and Vince was the eldest son of the main family. Without a boy, there would be no one to carry on the family line, since Polly is a girl. After stopping preconception care, Vince's behavior towards me gradually became more distant. He would often respond to my questions with non-committal answers and spent more time on his mobile phone. Even when I gently pointed it out, he'd dismiss it, saying he was busy with work. Vince's company was a good one, with almost no overtime or work on weekends. We used to have dinner together and often went out on weekends. But recently, Vince started working late more often, saying he had to do overtime. He even began working on weekends, something that was rare before. Recently, he went on a business trip for the first time since we got married. Even though we didn't have children, I wanted to remain close to Vince, almost like lovers, forever. But somehow, Vince seemed to be distancing himself from me. And as usual, Polly was still not warming up to me. She always played with her mobile phone, even when we were together in the living room. When Vince and I were in a somewhat strained relationship, Vince suddenly went back to his parents' house. Worried about what might have happened, I was restless waiting for Vince's return when an email from him arrived. The message read, "Dad has become a guarantor for a debt and had to take it on himself." Thinking this was a serious situation, I wondered if there was any way I could help. Running my own office, I had more disposable income than a typical housewife. I also had some savings Vince didn't know about. As I was considering using it, another email from Vince arrived. Dad had set me as the guarantor, it read, my eyes widening in shock as I stared at my mobile phone. No matter how many times I looked, the content of the message didn't change. As I was going over the email again, Vince called me.
Dad has done something terrible, just like I wrote in the email.
All I could manage to say was, yeah, in a weak voice. Vince continued, his voice filled with desperation.
There's a debt of over $100,000.
I was stunned. It was far beyond what I could handle. Our family can't just pay that off easily. But if we don't, it'll cause trouble not only for us, but to you and your parents. No matter how much I tried to speak, it felt like no air was reaching my lungs. It felt as if the air around me had thinned. I could only open and close my mouth like a fish, unable to produce any sound. We have no choice but to fake a divorce. We'll have to live apart for a while. I couldn't understand why Vince was bringing up divorce at this time. I wanted to argue back, but I couldn't find my voice. It felt like I was suffocating, unable to think clearly. If we don't pretend to be divorced, the debt collectors will go after you and your parents too. Could that really be true? But at that moment, I couldn't think of anything. Vince came home and tried to explain the debt to me, but honestly, I couldn't grasp it. I was too panicked to think. Polly had heard about the debt too, but she didn't seem too worried. At that time, I thought maybe Polly didn't fully understand the situation. We'll sort out the debt somehow. I'm going to leave the house to fake our divorce. Please bear with it for a little while. I believed Vince's words about getting remarried, clinging to them as my only hope. And so, after 8 years of marriage, when I was 41, Vince and I separated under the guise of a divorce. Polly, of course, chose to leave with Vince, leaving me alone again. Vince left the house. Since I used this place for my personal office, it would have been difficult for me to leave. I thought Vince and Polly would come back soon, but they never did. Shortly after, to my shock, Vince and Polly started living with another woman. When Vince told me this, I had to clutch my chest, fearing my heart might stop. Vince tried to explain everything over email. But I wanted to talk in person, so I convinced him to meet at a diner. Knowing it was a difficult conversation, I still dressed up and meticulously applied my makeup, oddly looking forward to seeing Vince again after so long. However, Vince showed up in a sweater and worn-out pants, as if he had come in his loungewear. Even though we hadn't seen each other in a while. He didn't seem happy to see me and got straight to the point without much of a greeting. I was already feeling quite down by this point.
About her name is Rachel. Polly's taken a liking to her.
He began and I barely processed what Vince was saying. Everything sounded like excuses to me. I couldn't believe that Polly, always so distant, would warm up to anyone.
Rachel has been through a divorce. She was escaping domestic violence from her husband, which is why she turned to me for help.
I wondered why Vince had to go to such lengths and couldn't understand it. Was Vince really that much of a pushover? Vince promised that once the debt issue at home and Rachel's domestic violence issue were resolved, we would live together again. All I could do was nod. Too much had happened, and I was unable to think deeply about anything. Today, fearing I wouldn't understand Vince's words, I recorded our entire conversation on my mobile phone. I planned to listen to it again once I had calmed down. There was no sign of Vince breaking up with Rachel. On the contrary, they seemed to be getting closer. Vince and Rachel were posting happy pictures together on social media almost daily. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't help searching for them. Every posted photo was a new torment for me. I've confronted Vince several times, complaining about it, but Vince would reply, "I have to post those photos so the abusive ex-husband gives up." Whenever I asked when he would break up with Rachel or about the debt, Vince always dodged the question, leaving me without a clear answer. Before I knew it, a year had passed. By this point, I started to have my doubts. I decided to contact Vince's family. Despite Vince's warning that contacting them could lead the debt collectors to me, ruining all our efforts, I couldn't just stand by. "Hello, Wally. It's been a while." Wally answered cheerfully.
"It's been a while, indeed. Are you over your illness?"
Illness? What was he talking about? Neither Vince nor I had been sick. Wally continued.
"I heard you were hospitalized with an infectious disease. Vince told us even calling you would be too strenuous."
I managed to deflect and kept the conversation going. "Oh, I see. I've gotten much better, thank you." I began to understand what Vince was plotting. The debt issue with his family was probably a lie. This also explained why Polly wasn't surprised when she heard about the debt. Vince must have told her everything, keeping me and his family apart with lies.
"I just got a new car. Maybe I can drive over to visit."
Exactly as I thought, someone struggling with debt wouldn't be able to afford a new car.
"Really? Please do come visit. We're looking forward to it,"
I replied, managing to end the call without revealing my shock. I was so stunned by the revelation that I collapsed onto the floor. I was unable to focus on work for a while after uncovering this truth. Everything Vince had told me was a lie. He must have started his affair with Rachel around the time we gave up on having children. His distant behavior, the constant presence of his mobile phone, the sudden increase in overtime, weekend work, and business trips were all lies to meet Rachel. Thinking about it brought uncontrollable tears. I had endured, thinking we would be together again, that it was just a matter of patience. I had trusted Vince. It was all nonsense. I had been manipulated by Vince. As my tears dried, I imagined Vince's mocking laugh looking down on me. I couldn't forgive him. I vowed to get my revenge on Vince. The first step was to gather evidence. I decided to file for divorce. Though alimony was a consideration, I primarily wanted to sever all ties with Vince. As soon as I signed the divorce papers and sent them to Vince, he submitted them to City Hall immediately. The divorce was finalized without much ado. I was taken aback, feeling somewhat deflated. Then one day, Vince suddenly showed up. By this time, any love I had for Vince was long gone, replaced only by distrust and a desire for revenge. With caution, I opened the door to find Vince, Rachel, and Polly, all with large bags in tow. Then Vince announced,
"We've decided to live here." "What do you mean by that?"
I was confused, not understanding what was happening.
"Just let us in for now." "Hello there."
Following Vince, Rachel and Polly entered the room without any hesitation. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something felt off. I hurried after them into the living room. The three of them were seated around the living room table. That's when I realized what was causing my unease. Rachel and Polly were smiling at each other. It struck me as odd to see Polly looking so happy. It felt like the first time I had ever seen her smile. I stood in front of Vince, crossed my arms, and looked down at him. Vince looked up and explained,
"Even though we're divorced, this place is still my home too. That's why we've decided to live here."
Indeed, the location was convenient, close to the highway and malls. But his entitlement was astounding. To leave on his own, bring back a woman, and then try to push me out. I thought Vince must be a devil to do such a thing so nonchalantly.
"I want you to leave."
What should I do? After a moment of thought, I decided to go along with Vince's scheme.
"Fine, I'll leave the house."
Only Rachel's mouth moved. She smirked. Standing up, Rachel headed towards the kitchen, muttering something as she opened the refrigerator.
"The freezer's on the opposite side in this fridge. I got it wrong,"
she noted, taking out a bottle of mineral water and starting to drink it without asking. Polly, without looking at me, and focused on her mobile phone.
"Make sure you clean up your room."
Rachel gave me a triumphant look.
"Be out by tomorrow."
I responded with a smile.
"Sure."
Rachel, without giving me another look, piled on.
"And make sure to take all your stuff with you." "Got it,"
I replied cheerfully, to which Rachel shot me a look of contempt. Once the conversation was over, Vince and his company stood up to leave.
"We don't want to get in the way of your packing, so we'll head out. Good luck with the cleanup,"
Rachel and Vince said smugly as they left the house. I laid out the report from the detective agency on the table. It included photos of Rachel working at a night bar and Vince drinking happily with her. I decided to use this evidence effectively and put it back into the envelope. I began to clean up the house. First, I called a junk removal service and arranged for them to come the next morning.
"Everything, you said." "I'll make sure everything is taken care of,"
I muttered with a smirk. I took another look around the room. The TV, washing machine, air conditioner, refrigerator, and microwave were all purchased after getting married, but they were being used for my office. It wouldn't be a problem for me to dispose of them. Wondering what to do with the contents of the fridge, I opened the door to check the food inside. Then, I noticed an unfamiliar food container in the back of the freezer. Curious, I opened it to find an envelope inside a cooling bag. And from it, a bundle of cash emerged. The envelope was printed with a law firm's name and addressed to Rachel. Rachel's act of taking out mineral water from the fridge must have been a camouflage. Her real goal was to hide the food container in the freezer. Was this money from the alimony Rachel received when she divorced? An idea struck me. The next morning, the junk removal service arrived. I asked them to take out all the household appliances and furniture. I also requested them to dispose of the contents of the fridge and proceeded with the work. Everything went smoothly, and by noon, it was all finished. With the house emptied, I felt a sense of relief as I looked around. Imagining the frustration of those three made me unable to stop laughing. Thus, I disposed of all the furniture and appliances, left the house, and headed to the Holiday Inn downtown. In the evening, Vince called.
"What the hell is going on? The house is empty,"
he shouted so loudly that I had to move the phone away from my ear.
"What are you talking about?"
I played dumb.
"I mean, there's nothing inside the house." "Well, I threw it all away,"
I responded.
"Threw it away?"
Vince sounded incredulous and continued to rant.
"Those were things we bought together. Why did you dispose of them without permission?" Well, we're not married anymore, right? And that place is also my office, so they were my things.
I retorted, and to that, Vince fell silent. Then Rachel's voice cut in.
Where did you dispose of it? Tell me the location.
She sounded desperate, almost hysterical. No wonder, considering the money she had carefully hidden was thrown away. As soon as I mentioned the name of the junk removal service, the call was cut off. You better hurry, everything will be gone, I muttered spitefully. While enjoying a solo dinner at a nearby restaurant, my phone rang on my way back to the hotel. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. To my surprise, it was the police. Apparently, there was a small fire at the junk removal service, and Vince, Rachel, and Polly were there. Moreover, Rachel was identified as the cause of the fire. Not knowing what was going on, I headed to the junk removal service. Upon arrival, the scene was chaotic. Spectators surrounded the area, and police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances were parked around. I gave my name to the police at the cordon and was allowed inside. Once inside the office, I saw Vince and the others looking diminished, surrounded by police. According to the police, upon entering the office, they started shouting, "Give back the money," and demanded to check the fridge. When an employee reluctantly opened the fridge to show it was empty, Rachel grabbed the employee by the shirt, demanding, "What did you do with the contents?" Unable to bear it, the employee pointed to the outside garbage area, where Rachel ran off to rummage through the trash. After tearing open garbage bags and not finding what she was looking for, Rachel lit a cigarette, smoked it, and carelessly threw the still-lit cigarette into the garbage area. That cigarette caused the garbage to catch fire, leading to the incident. Fortunately, the fire was quickly extinguished without any injuries, but the office's exterior wall was scorched. The police were about to conclude that there was no food container and that Rachel had just come to make false claims. That's when I informed the police that there indeed was a food container in the fridge. The food container was in the freezer, and I had taken it out myself. Rachel must have been looking for it without knowing. I had hoped Vince and Rachel would get dirty rummaging through the trash of the junk removal place. I apologized to the police honestly. The police said I wasn't to blame. They stated that since these three had caused a commotion and set the fire, the responsibility was theirs, and took Vince, Rachel, and Polly away. The specific charges weren't explained, but I was told to inquire at the police station for details. The next day, the police called me in. It turned out Vince, Rachel, and Polly had no fixed address. They had rolled into my place and stayed for a week, without changing their address. Without an address, they couldn't be released from detention. I was fine with that. But agreeing to be their surety was necessary to proceed with my plans. Regarding the charges, the severity between negligence and arson was significant, so I was advised to settle with the victim first. That evening, after being released, I picked up the three, including Polly, from the child protection facility. All three looked haggard, their complexions pale and exhausted. The next day, we went to the junk removal service to apologize. The service said they were willing to settle if Vince and Rachel compensated for the damaged items. Just when I thought it was settled, Rachel hesitated to pay.
I didn't do anything wrong, and I don't have the money to compensate.
At this point, what was Rachel even saying? Then she continued. You should pay.
Why should I have to pay?
I retorted sharply to Rachel.
Then, we'll use the money from the food container. Wait, what?
I explained with a smile that was almost too pleasant.
What's better for you? Using this money or going to jail for arson?
Rachel bowed her head, rendered speechless. The owner of the junk removal service, though dismayed, agreed.
If you compensate properly, that's fine by me.
Eventually, I handed the food container to Rachel, and the money inside was used to cover the expenses. Though it wasn't enough, Vince covered the remainder, and the matter was resolved smoothly. Vince and Rachel seemed relieved, thinking everything was settled. On the way back, they even managed to smile. But this wasn't the end. My punishment for them was just beginning.
It's not over yet. There's more to discuss, so follow me. Remember, you can't refuse.
Vince and Rachel meekly responded, yes. I headed towards the empty house, with the three of them following me. Anxiety was etched on their faces. Once inside, we moved towards the living room. In the empty living room, Vince and Rachel stood awkwardly. Polly, perhaps feeling anxious, clutched the hem of Rachel's skirt.
It's about the divorce settlement. I'm not involved, right? Because we're already divorced.
Vince retorted defiantly. I sighed in exasperation.
What are you talking about? You can claim alimony for up to 3 years after the divorce.
I threw the detective agency's report, credit card statements, and other documents on the table.
Here's the evidence of the affair. Pretending to go on business trips, you went to Los Angeles with Rachel and others, spending holidays in Rachel's apartment.
I know everything. Vince opened his mouth in shock and then hung his head. A silent, awkward moment passed. As both shuffled uncomfortably, exchanging glances. I took a deep breath.
You've been lying to me all along.
Now my gaze turned to Rachel.
And your domestic violence claims are lies.
Rachel began frantically scratching her head, muttering.
I don't know.
I pulled out my mobile phone, showed Rachel the screen. And she screamed.
No!
On the mobile phone screen, a man is connected via video call.
That's your ex-husband, right? I told him all about the lies.
All of Rachel's claims of domestic violence were lies. The truth was that Rachel grew tired of her ex-husband and cheated. Her ex-husband said he divorced her without fully understanding the reasons. Rachel, facing the screen, starts apologizing.
I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry.
She sobbed, her face a mess of tears. Rachel met Vince while working at a night bar. Vince was drowning his sorrows there, and they hit it off and started dating.
Both of you need to pay alimony.
Rachel's ex-husband demanded his alimony back before ending the call. Rachel turned her anger towards Vince.
Your plan failed. We couldn't take the house. Instead of getting alimony, we're the ones paying. My money is gone, and now we're paying for more troubles. You've brought so much misfortune.
Vince retorted, frothing at the mouth.
It's all because you hid the alimony in the fridge to avoid taxes.
I watched them argue with amusement.
Well, that's how it is. A lawyer will contact you.
Then phone rang, and to which I answered.
Are you arriving soon?
It's an empty house, but make yourself comfortable.
Vince is looking forward to it.
Vince looked up at me, tear-streaked and snotty, with a look of apprehension. The doorbell rang.
It's open, come on in. I'll be leaving through the back, but make sure you explain those initial lies properly.
I told them and left the house through the back. Vince and Rachel exchanged looks, trembling. Imagining what would happen next, I couldn't stop laughing. As I emerged from the backyard to the front, a new car was parked in the driveway. From inside the house, Wally's loud voice could be heard shouting.
Don't play with me!
I had invited Wally and Shannon over, saying, I want to see the new car. Vince and Rachel got a severe scolding, and Vince was disowned. Vince, having been involved with the causing of fire, was fired from his job. Without any severance pay, he used all his savings to pay me alimony, and then had to beg his parents. Wally, though reluctant, paid me directly considering my situation. Vince now works around the clock at a factory, with no distinction between day and night. Rachel, to repay the money she swindled and for the alimony to me and her ex-husband, works late into the night on holidays. Polly managed to avoid being sent to a foster home but is sulky and fed up with living in a cramped wooden apartment with Vince and Rachel. The three of them are constantly fighting, often reprimanded by neighbors for being too loud. All this was told to me by Wally. The house we lived in was purchased by the state for road expansion. It was my favorite residence, but it couldn't be helped. The purchase price was higher than the market value, and I also received moving expenses. Thanks to this, I was able to set up a new office in the city. As for my graphic design work, I had previously declined packaging designs for rival companies out of consideration for Vince, but now I accept a wide range of projects. Perhaps because I have been honest in my work, orders are steady and sales are increasing. I've expanded the scale of my business by hiring more staff. Having experienced a life deceived by others, living honestly without lying seems to be leading me to success. Lying leads to nothing good. This has become the motto of my life.
You're the housekeeper, so you do all the cooking, cleaning, and nursing. If you don't like it, get a divorce and get out.
Brian made it clear that I was his housekeeper. So that was your plan all along. I'm free labor, a housekeeper. On top of that, I'm also expected to look after your mother, Sarah.
Of course, we got married, and you're my wife. You're not cut out for it if you don't like it. Pack your bags and leave. I can divorce you anytime.
It must have been his final warning. Brian said it with a nasty smirk.
Listen, I'm an elite from a prestigious company. You're only just getting by with that pathetic business, thanks to me. Remember that.
All right, then. I whispered, and it seemed to reach Brian.
As long as you understand. Remember, do as I say.
Without responding, I turned my back on Brian and muttered quietly again. Then consider yourself fired.
What?
As a result of my actions, my elite husband. My name is Helen. 30 years old. I own a restaurant. People say it's impressive to be an owner at this young age, but the place was originally my father's, and I just took over. The chef, who's been with us since my father's time, is the one who actually cooks in the kitchen, preserving the flavors that have been cherished since its establishment. With the help of such longtime staff, I've somehow managed to keep the restaurant running. I'm still in the learning process. I took over the restaurant at the age of 22, right after graduating from college. Instead of getting a job, I was immediately entrusted with it from my father. I graduated from the economics department, so I thought I had learned a lot, but reality doesn't always follow the textbooks. Despite numerous failures, and my fair share of bad days, I've managed to keep the restaurant going to this day. I thought I was pretty lucky. About 5 years after I took over the restaurant, a man started coming regularly. It was Brian, who would later become my husband. Once, a group of men in suits came over. Brian was one of them. He said that he liked the food and started coming as a regular customer. Brian and his colleagues were employees of a major food manufacturer, and they said they were visiting various restaurants for research.
I've had my eye on this restaurant for a while, but I usually go to the bigger ones in town or in the suburbs, so I always pass this place by.
Oh, I understand. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. As I said that, Brian laughed sheepishly. I remember thinking he seemed honest and rather nice. My restaurant is indeed in such an odd location. But the taste is so good that many people have fallen in love with it and have been coming back for decades.
It's delicious. I've become quite the fan.
Brian confessed. True to his word, Brian became a regular customer and started talking a lot with me, the owner. Brian graduated from a top university and worked at a renowned company. He was the epitome of an elite. I had never been close to someone like that before. Not only was Brian brilliant at what he did, but he also had good looks. He was tall and slender with a well-defined face. Undoubtedly, he was the type who would be popular. Brian was 7 years older than me, so he was 34 at the time. I assumed he was married due to his age, but he laughed and said he was single. I've been living a life of work, and more work, and before I know it, I'm at this age. How silly of me. His easygoing manner, humorous conversation, and gentle tone made it seem like he wasn't an elite. Before I knew it, I had fallen for Brian. It was probably unrequited love. In his eyes, I was just the restaurant owner, and he was a regular patron. But then, out of the blue, he proposed to me.
Helen, would you consider being in a relationship with me, with marriage in mind?
I couldn't believe it. My heart was pounding. Could such a wonderful person really have feelings for me? It felt like a dream. Like Prince Charming had come for me. I felt like the protagonist of a fairy tale, and intoxicated by that dream, I accepted. A year later, I married Brian. But this fairy tale didn't end with, and they lived happily ever after. After we got married, the next chapter of the story turned into something much darker, like a picture book painted over completely in black.
Hey, you're my wife now. You understand what that means, right?
Brian said this soon after we started living together as a married couple.
Yes, we got married, so I'm your wife now.
I could only respond with confusion to his sudden change in tone. Then Brian suddenly raised his voice.
What kind of a response is that? I'm your husband, so you should address me with more respect. A wife should respect and honor her husband, don't you even know that?
I was too shocked to respond right away. What had happened? It was as if the Brian I knew had been replaced by someone else. A transformation from a prince to a tyrant. I wondered what kind of a witch had cast such a spell.
Listen, I'm an elite, you know that, right? You have to become a wife worthy of me. Prepare yourself for the training I'm going to give you.
From that day on, I was constantly ordered around by Brian. First, Brian demanded perfect housekeeping from me.
Make sure the house is immaculate, ready for anyone to come over at any time. That's a housewife's job. Don't you dare embarrass me.
My family ran a restaurant, so honestly, our house was never in a pristine state. My father was busy in the kitchen, and my mother was helping out too. There was no way we could manage perfect housekeeping. My parents did their best, tidying up and cleaning whenever they spotted a mess, but running a restaurant while raising me was overwhelming. My grandparents on my father's side lived far away, but my grandparents on my mother's side looked after me during particularly busy hours. That was how we managed to get by.
I can't do that. I mean, I have my restaurant to take care of. Don't make excuses before even trying. You don't even want to make any effort.
I managed to put the conversation to rest at the time by saying that I would try, but when I actually started, I realized that it was impossible.
Look, I have the restaurant to handle, so can't we hire someone for the housework?
It wasn't like I was saying I wouldn't do any housework at all. I just wanted to hire a housekeeper to make up for what I couldn't manage, but Brian didn't like the idea.
Why should we waste money like that? The best thing about a housewife is that she's free labor.
I was shocked by his words. Free labor, is that how Brian saw me? It became crystal clear at that moment.
That little restaurant of yours, who knows when it'll go under? You're lucky you found someone like me to support you. Be grateful and serve me well.
When we were dating, he had praised me for taking over the business from my parents at such a young age. That's one of the reasons why I fell for Brian. It might be a small place, but it meant a lot to me, and he had once praised my dedication to keeping it going.
Just keep the restaurant as insurance. If need be, we can sell it. It's worth something even if it's small. But if it starts losing money, shut it down immediately. It's not worth keeping if it's running at a loss.
That's what he said.
So that's what you've wanted all along. I'll never let go of that restaurant, no matter what. Just do your best, but don't forget that I'm only allowing this to be your little hobby because I feel sorry for you. Remember, it's because I care about you.
Brian said while laughing. From that day on, I started thinking about getting a divorce. But I still had some affection for Brian. I wanted to prove him wrong and make him apologize. I was sure he would understand someday. I worked like a horse with these mixed feelings. Indeed, it's a small restaurant, sustained mostly by regulars. Nowadays, most people opt for chain restaurants which offer the same taste wherever you go. That's why big chains thrive. But there will always be those who seek a nostalgic taste. That's why I want to keep the restaurant going. That desire never fades. While maintaining a seemingly peaceful marriage on the surface, I worked hard for the day I would prove Brian wrong. And to that, Brian half-mockingly, half-amusedly would say.
Wow, you're really trying hard, still keeping that restaurant going, huh? I thought it would fail soon. Well, as long as you take care of the house, you can keep going.
I was already doing it without being told. Every morning, I'd wake up early to prepare breakfast for Brian, wake him up, and see him off, then rush out of the house. I'd spend a busy day at the restaurant, and then after closing, I'd shop for groceries, come back home to cook dinner, and clean. When Brian returned, I'd serve him dinner, get ready for a shower, do the laundry, prepare for the next day, and take care of anything else left to do. I was cutting back on sleep, scheduling every day tightly to manage everything without wasting a moment.
If the house ever gets messy, I'll make you close down the restaurant immediately and sell it.
Brian was probably waiting for that day. I could feel it. Perhaps he married me intending to have a housewife with assets who provides housekeeping services for free. Back then, I was infatuated with Brian. He knew that and thought I'd never stand up to him. That's probably why he chose me.
It surprised me how much you dedicate yourself to the restaurant. I thought once we got married, you'd only have eyes for me.
I feel betrayed, Brian said one day. I thought I was the one being betrayed. I had believed he understood me when he chose me. I wanted to say that, but I swallowed my words. And then things got worse.
My mother has fractured a bone and is hospitalized. Sarah?
Brian's parents live in the neighboring state. I don't want to say this, but like Brian's true colors, they are not the most pleasant people.
Brian is our pride and joy. A graduate from a top university, working at a leading company, an elite man. You've been chosen by Brian, so you should be grateful and serve us well. Helen doesn't realize her luck. Someone married to our son, Brian, should be greeting us in a fancy cocktail dress and a bottle of decent wine.
That's right.
It's just as I expected. A daughter of a restaurant owner must be poorly educated.
That was the first thing they said to me when we met. Not only were they rude to me, but they insulted my parents too. I was about to say something back when my anger got the better of me, but Brian intervened to settle the matter, so I decided to keep my mouth shut for the moment.
Come now, Helen is still young. It's understandable that she lacks in certain areas. Think of it as having a potential to grow.
I should have realized the true nature of this family at that point, but back then, I was convinced that Brian was protecting me, and that he was on my side. After that, my in-laws continued to make snide remarks every time something happened.
I can't believe Brian married a restaurant owner's daughter. Right, someone like Brian could have married a daughter of a CEO or an executive.
Think about that, Helen.
Be a good daughter-in-law to us.
My in-laws seemed to think that only those working in big corporations like Brian were successful, and anyone in other professions, especially the service industry, were second-class citizens. But even so, Sarah's injury is unfortunate. I'd have to at least pay her a visit. But then Brian said something shocking. It's a femur fracture. She'll need hospitalization and rehabilitation for a while after surgery. Can you look after her?
Wait, but aren't hospitals still enforcing visitation restrictions? I can maybe visit or bring something, but looking after her might not be allowed, right?
Who said anything about the hospital? I mean, after my mother is discharged and comes to live with us. It took me a moment to understand what he meant. As I was silently pondering, Brian dropped the bombshell. Don't be dense. Once my mother is discharged, she's moving in with us, along with my father.
What?
You have a problem with that? Of course, it was a problem. Even the thought of living alone with Brian was unbearable, let alone with his parents too.
I can't take care of Sarah,
I said firmly.
I have my restaurant to run.
It's impossible.
Professional care would be best for her. Why should we pay for that when you're here? Then, close down the restaurant. Sell it and use that money for the family.
Brian made an outrageous demand.
I won't sell the restaurant. And I won't take care of Sarah. You're the housekeeper, so you do all the cooking, cleaning, and nursing. If you don't like it, get a divorce and get out.
Brian made it clear that I was his housekeeper.
So that was the plan all along. I'm free labor, a housekeeper. On top of that, I'm also expected to look after your mother, Sarah. Of course, we got married, and you're my wife. You're not cut out for it if you don't like it. Pack your bags and leave, I can divorce you anytime.
It must have been his final warning. Brian said it with a nasty smirk.
Listen, I'm an elite from a prestigious company. You're only just getting by with that pathetic business, thanks to me. Remember that.
All right, then. I whispered, and it seemed to reach Brian.
As long as you understand. Remember, do as I say.
Without responding, I turned my back on Brian and muttered quietly again. Then consider yourself fired.
What?
Brian didn't hear it clearly and asked again, but I didn't bother repeating myself.
I need to get things ready, so I can't do it right now. Fine, there's still time before my mother is discharged. They say she needs at least a month in the hospital. If you're ready by then, that's fine.
Brian must have thought I had agreed and went to the bedroom, satisfied. I had been preparing for this for 2 years. Everything had been for this very moment. But even so, I still had hope. That Brian would return to the man he was before we got married. I didn't want to believe that the person I loved so much, that those happy days, were a lie. That's what I thought. But all my hopes were shattered. I had to make up my mind. I was ready.
Hello, it's Helen.
No, it didn't work out.
It can't be helped. Let's take action.
I made a call to someone, ready to move forward. A month later, an article made it to the front page of the economics section of the newspaper. The story was that the food manufacturer for which Brian worked for was about to be acquired by a restaurant group in a large stock buyout.
What the hell is this?
In frustration, Brian yanked the newspaper from side to side, tearing it in half.
This is a joke. We're a leading company. And now they're selling us out to some stupid restaurant group.
Brian crumpled the torn newspaper and hurled it against the wall.
Damn it, what's gonna happen? This can't be true.
Brian turned on the TV as if waking from a nightmare, only to see the same news. It seemed the acquisition was real.
Damn it, how did it come to this?
Brian slumped down on the sofa and ruffled his hair in frustration.
There's nothing we can do about what's already happened. Here, take this.
What's this? Brian looked at what I offered him and his eyes widened in shock. He seemed very surprised.
What is this?
It's a divorce petition.
I can see that. What the heck do you think you're doing giving me this?
Brian crumpled the divorce papers and threw them too.
That too, after the newspaper? No matter how much you crumple it, nothing will go back to how it was. Why do you want a divorce? I demand an explanation.
Are you kidding? Have you forgotten? You're the one who mentioned it. Brian went silent, likely remembering his own words.
I won't take care of Sarah or live with your parents. If you don't like it, get a divorce. Those were your words, right? I did say that. But well, I was bluffing, thinking you wouldn't listen to me otherwise.
So it was a threat. Brian didn't respond.
I married you because I loved you. I trusted you. But you deceived me and betrayed me repeatedly. That's why I've decided to get a divorce.
I took another divorce petition from the file and placed it in front of Brian.
I have spare copies, so feel free to crumple that too. If I run out, I can get more or download it and print it out. We live in such convenient times.
Brian stared at the divorce petition placed before him again.
This is a lie, right?
He looked at me with pleading eyes.
No, it's true. This is reality. You're not that kind of woman, right? You wouldn't do something so cruel when I'm so vulnerable.
It seemed like he wasn't going to accept it so easily.
Think about what you've done, and what you've tried to do to me. Which do you think is worse?
I took my time to tell Brian.
Do you remember what you said after we got married? That a wife should respect and honor her husband?
Brian didn't respond.
I respected you even before we got married. That's why I decided to marry you. But after hearing those words, my respect for you vanished. People who trample on others are also trampling on their own feelings.
Brian looked down, silent.
You saw me only as free labor, a housekeeper. And the restaurant I cherished, you saw as an asset to cash in. I realized that, but still, I loved you. Helen.
Brian looked up at me with hope.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize you cared about me so much. That's why I acted harshly. Please forgive me.
Brian held my hand, tears streaming down his face.
I'll change, I promise. Give me another chance. I'll treasure you this time.
I'm sorry. I pulled my hand away from Brian's.
Why not? We loved each other, didn't we? We can still make it work.
No, it's too late. I've lost all faith in you.
That's why I decided to acquire your company. What?
Brian looked at me, bewildered.
The big restaurant group that acquired your company, with 1,900 full-time employees, I'm the president of that company.
Unfortunately, I'm letting you go.
No, this isn't the time for jokes. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind?
Brian half laughed, but it was the truth.
Never mind that for now.
Here, take this. Brian took the envelope I handed him with confusion, then screamed in disbelief as he checked the contents.
What's this?
It was evidence of Brian's affairs. There were documents from a private investigator and numerous photos.
A female employee in the secretarial department, a subordinate's wife, a recent college graduate, a woman from a business partner, a girl from a club, and who else?
The list was astonishingly long. Brian is attractive. And with his elite status, it's no surprise women flocked to him.
Amazing, isn't it? Your affairs are too many to count on both hands. I'll be seeking compensation for all of them, from you and the women involved. Hey!
What? Brian, looking at the documents and photos, turned pale and trembled. He tried to speak to me, but didn't seem to know what to say.
The problem is the time and place of the affairs. A lot of them seem to happen when you were supposed to be working. I think this is a breach of trust against the company.
A lot of them occurred when he was out of the office on business during working hours, making sales rounds, on business trips, and entertaining clients. Brian was with his mistresses instead, as detailed in the documents.
You've been investigating me like this all along?
Yes, that's right.
That's not fair.
Brian threw the documents and photos at me.
You used the money I earned for this? No, not a single dollar of your money was used. Liar. You don't have that kind of money.
Brian, being an elite, had a high salary. He saw me as free housekeeping labor, but he did contribute financially to the household.
You know I'm the owner of a restaurant, right? Yeah, that near bankrupt one. Just a hobby, isn't it? Owner, huh? Ridiculous. It's true that if you look at the finances alone, the restaurant doesn't seem that prosperous. But there's more to it.
I told Brian the whole truth.
That restaurant was for gathering information. I was researching the current trends, what sells, and things like that.
That restaurant, established by my parents, was the first of many. Now, it's a major chain with locations not just in America, but abroad too. The company that acquired Brian's workplace was the parent company of that restaurant chain.
This must be a lie.
It is not a lie. The location of the original restaurant was ideal for market research. The first restaurant thrived mainly due to my father's skills. But the reason we could expand was due to understanding customer preferences.
You never talked about your family business like this before. You tricked me.
I didn't trick you.
I just didn't tell you.
When I started dating Brian and considering marriage, my father advised me to wait and see.
In hindsight, my father saw through your true nature. He said to tell you if you didn't change after our marriage.
Back then, I would have married Brian regardless of his opposition. That's why my father had said such a thing. And what I told Brian when we married wasn't a lie. My father was ill and struggling to continue working. So, he had my uncle take his place as the company president, and he pretty much retired. That's why it was true when I said I took over the restaurant because my father was sick. He had undergone major surgery and difficult treatments. As an only child, I was still too young to take over the company, so I was in charge of the restaurant, partly so that I could learn new things. My business degree couldn't make up for my extreme lack of experience. I was told that if I failed to run the restaurant, I wouldn't be acknowledged as the successor. So, I worked hard to continue my father's legacy and earn his approval. My father probably warned me to keep quiet, fearing the business might be taken over or ruined by a bad marriage. But I thought Brian was different, and I wanted to prove I could be honest with him. That's why I remained silent. Well, I was disappointed.
My father even told me that if Brian wasn't the man I thought, I should resolve it by myself.
Of course, that's what I should do. There was no way I could run such a large corporation if I couldn't handle something as small as this.
So, I've lived these past 2 years thinking about how I would make you regret it if you didn't show any remorse. Though, at the same time, I hoped you'd change your ways.
I sighed, picked up my mobile phone, and made a call. The person on the other end answered right away, so I just said what I needed to and hung up. Immediately, the bell to the front entrance rang, so I unlocked it to let the visitor in.
Who's that?
Just watch. Soon the doorbell rang, and I invited the guest in.
The company president.
It was the former president of the company Brian worked for, soon to be mine. The former president bowed stiffly to me. Please proceed. The former president silently handed Brian a document.
Termination notice.
It was an official document. Brian was being fired for misconduct, including meeting women during work hours and charging personal expenses as business entertainment. In exchange for firing Brian, I promised the former president that he could continue as the company's president, and he agreed to the condition.
Even minor misdeeds can accumulate into a major offense. What you did constitutes a serious breach of trust. It's only fair that you're dismissed.
Brian stood in shock, but I had no intention of letting him off the hook.
If you understand, would you please leave now? Why should I? This is my house.
This place is rented, right?
The landlord says you can't stay here anymore. He doesn't want to rent it to you.
Brian looked completely confused. I decided to elaborate further.
I bought this apartment. And you seem to have forgotten, but the lease was only until last month. So, you no longer have the right to live here. I don't plan on renewing the contract.
Brian was speechless.
We'll have to decide on asset division and who gets which furniture, but for now, I don't want to see your face. Could you go back to your parents' house? Sarah is about to be discharged from the hospital, isn't she?
Sarah was scheduled to be discharged in a few days after a month-long stay in the hospital.
Go back and prepare for Sarah's return. We'll communicate through our attorneys about what comes next. Please take him with you.
I handed Brian over to the former company president.
If you come back, I'll report you for trespassing. Even though we're not officially divorced yet, if the landlord says no, it's a no.
Brian left the room with the former company president silently. There was still more work to be done, but I have reached the end of a chapter. After Brian went back home, I started receiving calls persistently from my in-laws, having heard about the divorce.
Helen, you're so amazing. Why didn't you tell us? You truly are our son's wife. We are so proud of you.
Getting a divorce must be a joke, right? Helen, you loved Brian so much. Can't you forgive a fling or two? That's just men being men. At first, they were arrogant, but when they realized my resolve to get a divorce was firm, they resorted to threats.
You got Brian fired. What are you going to do about that? We'll demand compensation. What you did is unthinkable for our son's wife. Hiring a detective to investigate your husband's behavior. Imagine how it would affect your reputation if it gets out.
When I confidently told them to go ahead with claiming compensation and leaking information about me, they finally shifted to begging.
Helen, I'm really sorry. It felt like you took Brian away from me, and I acted spitefully. Please understand. What are we supposed to do if you leave us? I apologize if I upset you. So, please forgive Brian. If you can't forgive him, how about just us? We were family once, after all.
Of course, I refused everything they had said to me.
I've said it over and over again, but I'm divorcing Brian. If you keep pestering me, I'll report you to the police and consider taking legal action.
After consulting with my attorney, we sent them a formal warning, and they finally stopped contacting me. I made sure Brian paid the compensation. And I ensured it was paid from the assets we divided. Luckily, his high salary meant he had savings. Now jobless and without savings, he's back living with his parents. He found a job in the service industry that he once looked down upon, working from early morning till late at night. Considering he had affairs with other men's wives, he's also facing compensation claims from their husbands. I hope he works hard and pays it all off, no matter how many years it takes. I talked to the women with whom he had cheated. All of them apologized, saying they weren't serious and were just in it for Brian's money and elite status. While I had anticipated this, any relationship with a married person, regardless of the reason, is a legal offense and can be subject to a lawsuit. I made sure these women understood the severity of their actions by legally requiring them to pay compensation. Hopefully, this will be a lesson, and they won't repeat the same mistake. After that, I officially took over as the company president from my uncle. I appointed my uncle as the chairman to continue receiving his help and advice. Although my father's condition has stabilized, he's not in a state to work. But seeing me take over the company, he started seeing to bring him peace, and his spirits noticeably improved. Occasionally, he still offers his thoughts and advice, which I value greatly. I hope my parents live as long as possible. Right now, that's my greatest wish. I've caused them so much worry by getting involved with such an awful man. I gave my parents a lot of trouble, but I resolved my problems all on my own. That seemed to make my father approve of me as a manager. Next time, I want to meet someone better and reassure my parents as a daughter, but I'm not sure I want to get married for a while. This company is like my child now. I want to raise it and help it grow bigger and better. As a company president, I'm just taking my first steps. But I believe a bright future lies ahead on this path. And of course, I'm still running that restaurant. This restaurant was where my parents began their business, and it was the start of my career. In a way, it's like my first child that I shall cherish for the rest of my life. I want to treasure it forever so that I never forget where I came from. Hey, Abigail. Are you really okay? On the morning of the field trip, I asked my granddaughter Abigail. But Abigail replied,
I'm fine. Plus, I'm looking forward to Grandma's delicious sandwiches, so I'm going.
And left the house earlier than usual. I watched Abigail head to school with a prayerful heart. I hope it ends up being a fun day. I couldn't help but wish. But my wish didn't come true. Just 30 minutes later, the worst happened.
Abigail! What happened?
When I opened the door, there stood my granddaughter, who had supposedly left for the field trip earlier, crying with her backpack covered in mud. Then,
look inside,
she said, offering the backpack filled with a ton of trash. I felt a surge of rage at the tragic sight.
What is this?
As I trembled with anger trying to remove the trash from the backpack.
Is something wrong?
My son Richard, who was working remotely, appeared behind me.
Richard, this,
I said, trying to suppress my anger and disappointment, presenting Abigail's backpack to him. Richard then picked up the trash from the backpack and, "Is this?" murmured with a smile towards Abigail. The next moment,
"That's great,"
he said.
"Yeah, everyone put it in." I was so happy I cried. "Now, I'll be late for the field trip if I don't go,"
Abigail said, laughing, and went back to school. Left out of the loop, I stood dumbfounded watching Abigail energetically run off. My name is Isabella, a 55-year-old housewife. My husband Kevin and I have been living with our son Richard and granddaughter Abigail for the past 5 months. The reason for our living together was that Richard's wife, Madison, passed away due to illness. Madison had terminal cervical cancer. She always had severe menstrual pains and would often rely on over-the-counter painkillers when feeling unwell. Additionally, she had irregular periods and occasional abnormal bleeding from a young age, which made her insensitive to bodily changes. As a result, by the time she realized something was wrong, it was already too late. When the hospital called to say she needed to be admitted for treatment immediately, I was in shock. Richard told me over the phone that Madison had cervical cancer, his voice filled with despair and powerlessness. The shock of the cancer diagnosis was one thing, but in Madison's case, the cancer had already begun to spread to other areas, making surgery impossible. Therefore, they had to try chemotherapy and radiation therapy. However, the treatments did not have the hoped-for effects. Richard's voice became increasingly dark and weak with each phone call. All I could do was listen to my son's stories. And respond. Then, a year ago, Madison quietly passed away in her hospital bed. It happened just 8 months after the cancer was discovered. If only I had pushed harder for her to go to the gynecologist. After Madison's death, Richard blamed himself for his indifference to her health and fell into a deep depression. In addition to caring for Abigail, who was in the 1st grade, and managing unfamiliar household tasks, he was overwhelmed both physically and emotionally. Abigail, too, seemed confused by the sudden loss of her mom, occasionally crying at night and refusing to go to school. My husband and I wanted to encourage and support them, so we suggested living together. Initially, Richard was hesitant, but he said,
"Having someone always at home might make Abigail feel safer,"
becoming more open to the idea. However, Richard had one major concern about living together. It was that Abigail would have to transfer schools as we moved in together. Richard worried that transferring schools, especially while grieving Madison's death, would be too much of a psychological burden for Abigail. But facing the reality of juggling work, household duties, and childcare, he felt he was reaching his limit. After much deliberation, Richard couldn't come to a decision. So, he decided to ask Abigail herself how she felt about it. "Hey, Abigail. Grandma and Grandpa said they'd like us to live with them at their house. What do you think?"
Live at Grandma and Grandpa's house? I want to go.
Is that so? It means you'll have to change schools. Is that okay?
What does change schools mean?
It means just like moving houses, you'll move to a new school. So, you won't see your current school friends anymore. Is that okay?
I see. Does Dad want to move?
Dad is fine with whatever. What you want is most important.
Then I want to move. That means Grandma will always be with me, right?
Yes, both Grandma and Grandpa will be with you always. So, let's start preparing for the move, okay? Abigail nodded strongly in agreement to Richard's final confirmation. Thus, my son's family came to live with us. Later on, I learned that Abigail decided to move for Richard's sake. Dad looks so busy with work every day, and he seems really busy with things like my homework and meals. So, I thought it would be easier for Dad if Grandma and Grandpa were with us. When Madison was in critical condition, I had stayed at Richard's house and took over all the household duties. It seems Abigail thought that living with us would reduce Richard's burden based on that experience. Both my husband and I were deeply touched by Abigail's kindness. And so, in place of busy Richard, we gave all our love and time to Abigail. Perhaps because of our efforts, Abigail, who was initially quiet and reserved after moving, gradually began to regain her former brightness. Still, sometimes she would look sadly at classmates chatting happily with their moms during shopping trips or school events. Even if she's putting on a brave face, it must still be hard for her. At that moment, I resolved to do anything I could for Abigail's smile. One day, while shopping at a nearby supermarket, a woman around Richard's age approached me.
Hello. You're Abigail's grandmother, right? I'm the mom of Scarlett, who's in the same class. My daughter always talks about how kind you are.
This woman, who introduced herself as Elizabeth, approached me with a strong perfume scent and a forced smile. I recognized her face, so I knew immediately she was a parent from the same class. However, I didn't have a very good impression of Elizabeth. The reason is, when I attended a school event in place of Richard, Elizabeth and other moms would look at me and Abigail and laugh, sharing rumors. I thought it might be a misunderstanding at first, but the same happened even when Richard attended. I thought she was quite rude. But since we were just classmates' parents and didn't interact much, I decided not to worry about it. Being unexpectedly approached by someone I was not comfortable with.
What should I do? I'm not very fond of this person,
I thought to myself. But thinking of her as my granddaughter's mom, I decided to continue the conversation for a while. Elizabeth then stood in the middle of the supermarket aisle and suddenly started bragging about her family. I can't give you details because it's personal, but my husband is a rising star in a big corporation. So, he earns more than most people. And he's trusted so much by his boss that he's about to get promoted. Is that so? Congratulations.
Plus, my daughter is academically excellent and popular in her class. She was even scouted to be a kids model.
That's impressive. I should be going soon. Thinking it wasn't a conversation worth blocking the supermarket aisle for, I attempted to leave. Then Elizabeth,
just listen till the end, I'm not finished,
raised her voice suddenly. Taken aback by her abrupt change, I involuntarily stopped.
This is why I hate dealing with old people. Anyway, what I'm saying is, your granddaughter is a bad influence, so I'd appreciate it if she didn't associate with my daughter anymore.
Eh? What do you mean?
Abigail's mom died from an illness, right? It's really sad for Abigail, left behind. She still looks sad sometimes. It's like she's spreading unhappiness? Like a walking misfortune?
What are you trying to say?
Basically, Abigail's presence is bothersome.
What are you talking about?
It's a critical time for us. My husband is up for a promotion. So, I've told my daughter not to hang out with Abigail, to avoid catching her bad luck. But Abigail keeps following her around, and it's causing us trouble. Please tell her off firmly.
Elizabeth said that and disappeared into the crowd at the supermarket with a snide smile. I was left standing there, stunned by the cruel content of the conversation and the unexpected event, unable to retort. That evening, when my husband Kevin came home, I told him about what happened at the supermarket.
So, that happened. Maybe Abigail is having a hard time at school? What should we do? Call the teacher? Oh, should we consult with Richard first?
Isabella, calm down. Did any other parents say something like this?
Eh?
No, this was the first time. Then let's just talk to Richard and observe a bit more. We don't want to make a fuss and make Abigail feel worse, right?
But to be told such things? She must be suffering at school. At least, let's ask about how things are at school. Okay?
All right, calm down. I'll bring it up during dinner tonight and see how things go from there. Is that okay?
Yes, please. My husband reluctantly agreed, understanding my feelings. I really wanted to ask Abigail directly. But upon reflection, I might press her too much out of concern if I were to ask. Thinking this, my husband seemed more suited to calmly handle the conversation this time. That night, dinner was just the three of us, as Richard came home late from work. Abigail helped with dinner as usual and enjoyed my cooking, saying it was delicious. From her behavior, it was hard to believe she was having a hard time at school.
Maybe she's hiding it so we won't notice.
For the first time today, I doubted Abigail's actions. And as the meal was coming to an end, I signaled my husband. He cleared his throat and casually asked Abigail, "How's the new school? Are you having fun?" Abigail stopped eating and was silent for a while at the sudden question. Then, in a small voice, "It was fun before, but not so much now," she answered. I thought to myself, I knew it. Then, "What's not fun?" I asked Abigail. Abigail hesitantly began to talk about what was happening at school. Scarlett suddenly said she didn't want to play anymore. She said we couldn't be together during break or when going home from school. According to Abigail, Scarlett had suddenly started ignoring and avoiding her about a month ago. And because of that, other classmates also began to act distant towards Abigail. "Why doesn't Scarlett want to play with you anymore? Did you ask her why?" My husband also asked Abigail, sounding concerned. But it seems Abigail herself couldn't think of any reason. "Maybe everyone hates me now?" Abigail muttered, then cried with big tears rolling down her cheeks.
I may have underestimated how serious the situation was.
I quietly stood up, hugged Abigail, and gently rubbed her back. Then, Richard came home. Surprised by the sight of Abigail crying, my husband explained the conversation during dinner. Richard, somehow very calm, knelt down to match Abigail's gaze and said, "It's okay, Abigail. No matter what, the three of us will protect you." He gently stroked Abigail's head. Then, standing up, he said, "Dad, can I talk to you for a sec?" And called my husband to another room to start a discussion. Probably about what to do next. Abigail, perhaps touched by Richard's words, began to cry loudly, releasing her pent-up feelings. I held her, letting her cry until she felt better. And strongly wished that these sad tears would only be for today. A few days later, Abigail brought home a letter about an upcoming field trip.
The timing is terrible, knowing she's not getting along with her friends and now a field trip.
The moment I read the letter, I imagined Abigail being alone on the field trip. And remembered the big tears from a few days ago, feeling my heart was about to burst.
Hey, Abigail. Just in case, if you don't want to go on the field trip, you don't have to force yourself.
I shared my thoughts with Abigail before consulting Richard or my husband. I knew it was important to discuss as a family, but I couldn't help worrying about Abigail. Then, after a moment of silence, Abigail said, "I'm okay. I want to go on the field trip because I want to eat Grandma's sandwiches," and answered with her usual bright smile. That night, Abigail excitedly told her dad and my husband about the field trip. Both smiled and said, "Sounds fun." But I couldn't shake off my worries. So, on the morning of the day, "Hey, Abigail. Are you really okay?" I asked again.
However, Abigail said,
"I'm okay. Plus, I'm looking forward to Grandma's delicious sandwiches, so I'm going,"
and left the house earlier than usual. I watched Abigail head to school with a prayerful heart. Please, let it end as a fun day. But my wish did not come true. Just 30 minutes later, the worst happened. The doorbell rang and I rushed to the front door in a panic.
"Abigail! What happened?"
There stood my granddaughter, who had supposedly left for the field trip earlier, crying with her backpack covered in mud. Then, "Look inside," she said, offering the backpack filled with a ton of trash. The leisure sheet we folded neatly together the night before, the field trip guidebook we colored cutely, and the sandwiches I made that morning were all buried under the trash and not visible. I felt a surge of intense anger at the tragic sight.
"What is this?"
As I trembled with anger trying to remove the trash from the backpack.
"Is something wrong?"
My son Richard, who was working remotely, appeared behind me. Despite everything, Richard was worried about Abigail too. Unusually for him, he had said, "I'll work remotely today," and stayed in the living room from the morning to keep an eye on Abigail. And after Abigail left, he seemed restless and couldn't concentrate on his work. Richard must have been hoping that Abigail would enjoy the field trip and return home happily. But instead, this happened.
"Richard, this,"
I said, trying to suppress my anger and despair while presenting Abigail's backpack to him. Then Richard picked up the trash from the backpack and, "Is this?" murmured with a smile towards Abigail. The next moment,
"That's great,"
he said. I was confused by Richard's incomprehensible behavior, almost raising my voice in confusion. However, Abigail, just like Richard, laughed and said,
"Yeah, everyone put it in. I was so happy I cried. Now, I'll be late for the field trip if I don't go,"
and went back to school. Left out of the loop, I stood dumbfounded watching Abigail energetically run off. Richard then told me,
"We've taken care of it, it's going to be okay now,"
and smiled gently before going upstairs. My head was still full of unanswered questions. But I didn't want to disturb Richard while he was working, so I silently started to clean up the dishes in the living room. I don't really understand, but I'm just glad Abigail could smile. At that moment, I was happier to see Abigail's smile than to resolve my own questions. Since Richard said,
"It's going to be okay,"
I thought I could talk to him later at leisure. I felt a sense of relief for the first time in days and felt lighter. After finishing the chores, I unusually dozed off on the living room sofa. When I woke up, it was an hour before Abigail's return.
"Oh no! I slept so much. I have to do the laundry, prepare the bath, and make dinner."
I hurried to finish the chores and was preparing dinner when, as expected, Abigail returned home. As usual, the doorbell rang. And I responded with, "Coming." But the scene displayed on the screen made me tense up again. There was a man with a regretful face, a girl who looked like she might start crying any moment, and Elizabeth with a very unhappy face. In a panic, I called for Richard upstairs. Surprised but calm, Richard first opened the door and warmly welcomed Abigail.
"Welcome back."
With a smile. Abigail returned the smile just like in the morning. "I'm home," she answered and jumped into Richard's arms. Watching Richard and the others. "Nice to meet you, I'm Scarlett's dad."
May I have a moment of your time?"
The unfamiliar man spoke in a weak voice. Richard quietly responded, "Please, come in," and welcomed the three of them to the entrance. Indeed, this man was Scarlett's dad, and the girl was Abigail's classmate, Scarlett. Upon entering, Scarlett's dad immediately started to apologize deeply. I'm truly sorry for my wife's disgraceful actions that deeply hurt your daughter. Next to him, I'm sorry, Abigail. Scarlett also tearfully apologized. Scarlett's dad then continued to explain the situation. It turns out Scarlett was popular among her friends, and Elizabeth took pride in that. However, when Abigail transferred to the school, she quickly became the center of attention in the class. Scarlett didn't mind this and would often talk about Abigail to Elizabeth. Elizabeth then said,
"Just because she's a transfer student, she's getting too much attention. Using the fact that she doesn't have a mom to garner sympathy from everyone. What a mean girl. Scarlett is the star of the class. I'll make sure she realizes that."
And she told Scarlett,
"Listen, Scarlett. Abigail is actually a very mean girl. You shouldn't hang out with her. Make sure to tell this to your classmates too and suggest that everyone stops playing with Abigail. Got it? You can do it, right?"
I really wanted to keep playing with Abigail. But if I broke the promise, Mom would punish me. Scarlett clung to her dad's arm and earnestly shared her feelings. It later turned out that the punishment Scarlett mentioned involved Elizabeth hitting her on the head, back, or buttocks. Scarlett was just scared of the punishment and had been following Elizabeth's orders. Elizabeth, who had been controlling Scarlett through violence, didn't expect what happened next. Not a single one of Scarlett's classmates accepted her suggestion. Instead, wanting to cheer up Abigail, who was mourning her mom, they secretly collected empty snack boxes with points for Abigail's favorite character merchandise. Unaware of this, Abigail had been concerned about her classmates whispering and hiding things from her. A few days ago during dinner, "Maybe everyone hates me. That's why," she tearfully told us. But in reality, Abigail wasn't disliked by anyone. On the contrary, the kids had come up with the idea to surprise her with gifts on the field trip day. Abigail went to school earlier than usual that day because her classmates had called her out for the surprise. When she arrived in the classroom, her classmates filled her backpack with those empty boxes.
"Wow, thank you, everyone. Oh, I need to tell Dad and Grandma about this. I'll be right back."
Abigail excitedly left the classroom, clutching her backpack. But she tripped and fell at the shoe lockers, getting her backpack covered in mud. That's when Scarlett happened to pass by. "Abigail, are you okay?"
"Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just going to go home for a bit."
"A forgotten item?"
"No, look, isn't it amazing?"
Scarlett remembered the classmates' surprise gift upon seeing inside Abigail's backpack.
"I'm going to show it to Grandma and Dad."
Seeing Abigail's beaming smile, Scarlett wanted to do something for her too. So she said, "Oh, wait. You're hurt, so let me put this on you," and offered to put her cherished character Band-Aid on Abigail's knee.
"Really? Isn't this your treasure?"
"It's okay. Because Abigail is an important friend."
"Thank you. I'll rush over and show you, or else we'll be late for the field trip."
On her way home, Abigail seemed moved by everyone's kindness, tears overflowing. "I saw Abigail, muddy backpack and all, crying, and thought she had a terrible time at school. But to think such a wonderful thing was happening." Both Richard and I were moved by this wonderful event and found ourselves in tears.
"Scarlett really loves you. So, if you don't mind, please play with Scarlett again. We'd really appreciate it."
Scarlett's dad said this and then apologized deeply once more. "Your feelings have come across clearly, so please, no need for apologies. Abigail, you can make up with Scarlett, right?"
"Yeah. Scarlett is an important friend."
Afterward, "I'm so sorry. they said, apologizing repeatedly as the three of them went home. Throughout this conversation, Elizabeth didn't say a word. She glared at us the entire time with a look of dissatisfaction.
To hurt a child and not even apologize.
I thought Elizabeth was rude and selfish for just standing there without apologizing. But I was about to learn that wasn't the case.
What? Scarlett's dad is Kevin's subordinate?
After Abigail went to bed, I reported the evening's events to my husband, along with Richard. It was then, from Richard and my husband, that I heard the true story. According to Richard, the realization that Scarlett's dad was my husband's subordinate came from a casual conversation at a school event. But thinking it would be awkward to bring it up, he decided to let it go.
Dad's job and me are entirely separate. But when it comes to Abigail, it's a different story.
A few nights before, after seeing Abigail in tears, Richard told my husband about Scarlett's dad. The next day, my husband called Scarlett's dad to discuss what had happened. Scarlett's dad promptly checked the facts with Elizabeth and Scarlett. And upon finding out my husband's story was true, he rushed to finish his work and came to our house to apologize.
So that's why Elizabeth was glaring. But it turns out she's decent after all.
He's very serious and trustworthy, both in his work and character.
Maybe even too serious.
We'll have to support him, as it might get tough from here on. Just as my husband had secretly predicted, Elizabeth and her husband ended up divorcing soon after. However, since Elizabeth was a housewife,
if you want a divorce, you'll need to ensure my lifestyle. And I'll never give up Scarlett's custody. I need $5,000 a month for living and child support. If you can't pay, no divorce.
She demanded unreasonable conditions. Scarlett's dad consulted a lawyer and began gathering evidence to make the divorce favorable for him. It then came to light that Elizabeth had been cheating with a man she met on a dating app. Elizabeth was obsessed with her affair partner, but suddenly, she could no longer contact him. After being blocked from messaging and calls, Elizabeth was always irritated. And that irritation gradually turned into excessive expectations for Scarlett.
You have to be the best at lessons and school. If you fail, there will be consequences.
Scarlett worked hard and diligently met Elizabeth's expectations. Yet, Elizabeth continued to punish her for unreasonable reasons regularly. This was officially recognized, and Scarlett's custody was granted to her dad. He even demanded compensation for the affair, and Elizabeth, now working part-time, is struggling to pay it. After this event, a pleasant change occurred in our home. Abigail, who previously only had my husband and me to play with after school, now had a playmate. And that was Scarlett. To be honest, I didn't have a very good image of Scarlett. But after the divorce was finalized and she was freed from Mom's control, Scarlett turned out to be a very kind and considerate child. Above all, Abigail's joyful smile when playing with Scarlett said everything. Since then, Abigail and Scarlett have been playing together almost every day. I am now very happy to see Abigail's smile every day, something I've always wished for. And I plan to continue pouring unwavering love into Abigail, hoping this happiness lasts forever.
I wish I never had a daughter.
My mother Chloe screamed hysterically.
Once you're in high school, you're out of here.
My father David threw things as he spoke. Our younger brother Daniel, years apart, looked at us with a mocking sneer. This house is like a dwelling for demons. Even without a place to go, we must leave soon. For the sake of my precious sister Sophia and my own life. My name is Amelia. This spring, I joyously turned 40. When I was about 20, I thought being in my 40s was ages away, but after turning 25, the countdown of age seemed to speed up. But back in my teens, every day felt endlessly hellish. I have a twin sister, Sophia. Our family runs a small chain of restaurants in the city. Well, it's just about 3 restaurants, nothing grand. It's not an age-old family business. It expanded to 2 under my grandfather and just 1 more since my father took over. Once you step out of the local area, almost no one knows our restaurant's name. Our small restaurants hardly stand a chance against the big chains. Yet, my parents always had this strong sense of being business-owning family. My father was saying so. Especially when it came to the issue of succession, my parents unusually desperate, even from a child's perspective.
First off, as twins, we were always told, you'll be future star CEOs just for being twins. Grow up beautiful.
Thus, from a young age, we underwent rigorous beauty care. It would have been better if we were plain, but unfortunately, we inherited good looks from our reasonably attractive parents. Under their educational policy, we had our eyebrows neatly done as soon as we were aware, and my mother would apply lotion to our skin every day after bath. I wonder now if slathering all those chemicals on a young child's skin did more harm than good. On top of that, we had our own beautician by the age of 5. Unbelievable, right? I've never heard of anyone else having this, but it's true. I couldn't share this with classmates without making them jealous. We were also under strict weight management, hardly ever indulging in sweets or hearty meals as kids. My maternal grandparents, coming from a more typical employee family, tried to treat us with homemade dishes and snacks, but my father disapproved and my mother followed suit. Consequently, we became distant from my maternal grandparents. Due to differing educational views,
Don't interfere anymore.
our parents would lash out. We had lessons too, piano, ballet, and skating as well, since it could connect us with rich heiresses. We were never pampered. To our parents, we were products for the future. Everything was for the sake of expanding the business. As a child, I didn't realize this and genuinely believed, I'm loved by my parents. Their strictness is a sign of love. Someday, I'll take over the business and make them happy. Sophia thought the same. But then, a life-changing event occurred. When we were in elementary school, a baby brother was born. Named Daniel, he was the only boy in the family. Seeing him,
A boy is more suitable for succession.
our parents decided. So, they shifted their focus entirely to him, stopping all our lessons and even the strict beauty regimen. The beautician was gone. That would have been fine. But then one night, I overheard my parents talking.
I never really wanted a daughter. I thought twins would be good for publicity, but if it's a boy, I couldn't care less.
Yeah, I agree.
A woman isn't suitable to take over the company. All our shop managers are men, and it's better if men are in charge. When you think about it, having 2 daughters is just a waste of money.
What should we do about it, then? They were talking about us as if we were just some bulky trash they needed to get rid of. Up until then, I had convinced myself that their recent coldness was just because they were busy with our little brother. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. After that conversation, I slowly began to notice a change in how they treated us. First, we were forbidden to go out and play with friends on holidays. My mother explained, you could get hurt. But we always ended up helping at the main shop on holidays. In essence, we were being used as pieces of the household to prevent us from going out and playing. It must be a strategy thought up by our parents to make up for lost time. When we served food to the customers,
What cute twins! Good for you, helping out.
they would say, there's nothing praiseworthy about it. We were being forced to do it. My parents, getting carried away with the situation, started making us work in the shop on holidays, doing simple waitressing, and eventually even had us sing and dance to popular songs. We're known as the lovely little sisters, and needless to say, our popularity brought more customers to the shop. But nobody realized that our freedom was being sacrificed behind the scenes. On weekends, we were sent to the shop. Don't let your grades drop. It would look bad. And on weekdays, despite being elementary school students, we had to study late into the night. We couldn't slack off in practicing the songs and dances for the shop. Our overly packed schedule, like that of an unreasonable full-time employee, left us exhausted every day. Perhaps due to fatigue, or maybe stress, our adolescent bodies, despite not eating much, started to gain weight easily. Once our parents realized we were of use to them, they became fussier about our appearances.
Make sure you manage your weight,
they would say, giving us mostly vegetables, typical of what a model would eat. Although we were never denied food, such a diet was too healthy for a growing teenager. Because of this lifestyle, there were times in middle school when I missed my periods. Meanwhile, my brother Daniel, who had been doing karate since he was young, didn't gain weight easily. He was treated differently.
If you're going to be a future entrepreneur, you need to know good food.
And he alone ate high-quality ingredients. For a teenager, resentment over food is significant. The treatment from my parents, coupled with the disparity in meals between us siblings. It was enough reason to resent Daniel. I think it was only natural that the bond with Sophia would become stronger. One day, after dedicating our youth to the shop and house, and even beginning to resent our parents, my father called us.
It would be embarrassing if word got out that an idiot came from our house, so make sure you go to a high school with a good reputation.
He said so. It was the beginning of 8th grade in middle school. Despite barely managing our grades while helping at the shop, it was impossible to meet such expectations. I asked if at least we could be excused from helping at the shop, but he didn't listen.
Getting into a famous high school becomes a marketing slogan,
he said. There was no fighting back for a mere middle schooler.
If you end up in a low-tier high school, don't bother coming.
Threatened like this, we studied desperately. In the following year, my sister got into the high school our parents wanted, but I didn't. My father was furious, throwing things around, luckily not hitting anyone. But I was terrified he might hit Sophia, who was trying to protect me. My mother also holding her head.
Why has it come to this? Why are you so useless?
Hysterically yelled. It was like a scene from hell. Was it my fault for not getting into high school? Wasn't my effort worth recognizing? Only Sophia, who understood me, hugged and cried with me. Daniel, resembling our father, looked down on me as if to say, that's why women are. It was infuriating.
Why do you have to mess up my life?
My father said. If anyone was messing up a life, it was my parents messing up ours, but I couldn't say that.
Enough. The family heir is a man. We don't need women. Should have done this sooner. Listen, we'll pay for the tuition, but don't you dare come home. It looks bad. Once you two are in high school, both get out. Don't ever come back.
He slammed the newspaper on the floor. At that sound, Sophia and I flinched, looking at each other, tears in her eyes. We couldn't stay here. It wouldn't just be high school. College entrance would be the same. I was a bit weak today, but I am her older sister. Understanding my intention, Sophia nodded. Indeed, she's my other half in this world. Quietly holding each other's hands, we glared at our parents.
Understood.
And simply replied. My father said,
you'll come crying back, but I won't help.
But I thought I was not going to cry. A few days later, on the night of our middle school graduation, Sophia and I left home. For about 2 days, we slept in a park, but noticing a homeless person watching us with a creepy smile. We realized living on the streets wasn't feasible for 2 kids. There were no adults we could rely on. That's when the faces of our maternal grandparents came to mind. They had been estranged from us for scolding our parents about proper child rearing. Maybe they would be on our side, but our hope was dashed. Even after explaining our situation to our middle school and borrowing a phone from our former teacher to contact them.
I'm sorry, but we don't think of her as a child anymore. We don't want to have anything to do with you guys either.
We were rejected by our maternal grandfather, Andrew. Apparently, unbeknownst to us, my mother had been extorting money from them. It was understandable that they wanted nothing to do with us. Just when I thought nothing was going right. How about coming to my place? It might be cramped for 3. Our former teacher Scarlett offered. We knew if our parents filed a missing person report, it could jeopardize Scarlett's position because of us, runaway girls. But we also knew our parents wouldn't bother. Most importantly, there was no one else we could unconditionally trust and rely on. We said, "Please, teacher," with asking for shake hands. Sensing our tension, Scarlett joked a bit,
"Understood,"
and smiled. Thus, a new life began for Scarlett and two of us. Even if you're a bottom-tier high school, you still pay tuition. Our parents said they'd pay for tuition, but in reality, we were treated as if we declined enrollment. They would have thought once we left home, it should be better to spend all the money on Daniel. We can't even go to school. As we were disheartened, Scarlett offered,
"Can you do part-time? I wish I could cover all expenses, but it's a bit tough right now. I'll support you in other ways."
Like this, right? High school students can work part-time. We weren't like before. Realizing that, it seemed Sophia had the same thought. We don't need money. But could you help us with our studies? Scarlett was surprised at our request.
"Of course, but what will you do?"
We'll save money working part-time for a year, no, 2 years. Then we'll go to high school. But our studies might suffer, that's why we need you.
"You can rely on me for money."
No, it's not that. Relying on you would feel like losing to our parents. It's probably just us, but we want to prove them wrong on our own. She was silent for a while, contemplating. It's understandable, we were planning to delay it for a year or two, just out of spite for our parents. Was it the right resolve, or just childish stubbornness? After a pause,
"All right,"
she said. A year later, Sophia and I worked multiple part-time jobs and, with Scarlett's advice, entered an online high school. It was cheaper, and we could continue working. We also rented a room next to Scarlett's house. We didn't want to compromise her position by living with her continuously, though we never wanted to contact our parents again. "We need your consent to rent a house." We reached out.
"As long as we don't see your faces, do whatever."
And they agreed easily. In reality, we hardly lived in that room, mostly staying at Scarlett's place. But it was a necessary precaution. Scarlett helped pay some of the rent. We refused to let her pay it all. She supported us thoroughly, from studies to personal life. Though she was in her 20s and more of a sister, she had become our mom. Thanks to her, we graduated from high school and, despite a delay of about 2 years, made it to a fairly prestigious university. The support from Scarlett was invaluable. At university, Sophia and I had another goal besides graduating. That's why we attended university. That was starting a business. To gain the knowledge and qualifications needed, every day was filled with part-time work, not easy, but we were determined. 3 years after graduating, we finally opened Cafe and Bar ANS Delightful, serving coffee, sweets, pizza, and sandwiches during the day, and alcohol in a stylish setting at night. Cafe and bars weren't as common then, but it caught on, and within 5 years, we opened a second location.
"We did it, Amelia." "Yes, we did." "Sophia."
We had been betting everything on this second shop long before it opened. Our plan was to establish credibility and confidence, then open this shop near our parents' restaurant. Because that's what I had decided. By chance, a property became available right across from their most cherished third shop, allowing us to open our second shop. It was the start of a delightful revenge. Not that we were doing anything special. We simply welcomed customers every day with all our heart. But our shop, run by the beautiful sisters, was already quite popular from our first location. Rumors spread that the popular sisters were temporarily at the second location. The place quickly filled up. Within 2 days of opening, we surpassed our sales goal, a complete success. Naturally, word got to our parents' restaurant. On the 7th day after opening,
"They're mocking us."
Our parents stormed into our shop during business hours. Exactly as we expected, the shop was buzzing. Some customers whispered, "Isn't that the owner of the shop over there?" Sophia and I, smiling, faced our father. "Please, quiet down, customer," calmly said.
"Don't joke with me. What's this about? Why open a shop near mine? So selfish. Our customers are decreasing because of here. Sly and unbecoming."
Their words made us burst into laughter.
Where we set up shop is our choice, as long as we pay the rent, right? We're not joking around.
Exactly.
Calling us sly and unbecoming. Please don't spout such vulgar words in front of the customers.
Our overly calm only aggravated them more. After all, they had us working in customer service since we were kids. Controlling our emotions like this was easy. Then,
what an attitude towards your parents!
Our father shouted, the shop stirred.
Parents? What, a family feud?
Curious and confused glances turned towards us.
Parents? You mean the ones who forced us to work in their shop as children and threw us out for not getting into the high school they wanted? Considering parents as those who treated their child as a product, enforcing weight control and stealing freedom?
Our words caused a murmur among the customers.
That's terrible.
Or,
so that's the kind of person he is.
I hear words like, some customers, who knew us from childhood.
That place has been strange since they had a boy.
Commented. Our parents, realizing the tense atmosphere, turned pale.
No. That's not it. These girls are just rebellious. We only had them help in the shop for social learning.
Our father was explaining with an over-gesture to everyone, but it backfired.
I can't believe it. They must be telling the truth about their father. Isn't it a case for child services? Admitting they had to help is just ridiculous.
The customer's exchange was unstoppable, and he kept repeating,
That's not it.
But no one listened. Our mother,
I protected these kids,
trying to claim her innocence, said, Could you please leave?
You guys are disturbing the other customers,
I said, attempting to escort them out when suddenly,
Shut up.
Our father raised his fist at me. I instinctively shrank back. Then,
Stop it.
An elderly man, who had been quietly enjoying his sandwich and coffee, intervened.
Enough. How embarrassing. You two are disturbing people's meals. Get out.
Other customers joined in.
That's right, get out.
I got a call asking me to leave.
What is it?
Angry, our parents were quickly escorted out by a burly customer. He whispered something in their ears, turning their faces pale, and they never came back in. The shop erupted in applause.
You all had it tough. We support you. Keep going.
Encouraged by these kind words, we said,
It's good to have a shop.
That's what I thought from the bottom of my heart. Later on, our shop became the talk of the town after the incident with our parents, leading to the closure of all 3 of their shops. It turns out, the elderly man who saved me from our father's punch was our neighbor. His spreading of the incident branded their chain as run by a violent manager, causing a loss of popularity. While their customers dispersed, many became our regulars, liking our shop, thanks to the elderly man. With our parents' business gone, Daniel, who had been groomed as the successor, was lost.
He blamed us for his ruined life and wreaked havoc at home,
giving our parents a hard time. Soon after, our mother called, pleading to at least employ him in our shop. Of course, we politely refused. Our shop, run by beautiful sisters, only hires beautiful-hearted people. We had no room for a brother like our father. By the way, both Sophia and I got married in our mid-30s. Continuing the business. Due to the twins, we both fell for the same customer inadvertently. Just as we braced for a sibling rivalry, it turned out they were twins too. They never came together, so we never realized. Each thinking,
he seems slightly different today.
Luckily, Sophia liked the older brother. And I liked the younger one, so crisis averted. Thanks God. Now, the shop is a family business, involving our husbands. Our children are not twins though. All they look so alike with each other as they could be siblings, the power of twin genes. We have no plans to train them for business, but seeing their interest in playing shop, they might be standing at the shop's front soon. What a joy that would be. As for our teacher Scarlett, she married around the time we opened our shop.
Now, you two are settled.
Saying so in her happy wedding, which was impression. Recently, her family has been visiting our shop, continuing our family's close relationship. We've repaid all the rent and support she gave us, but I still want to repay her in various ways. She was more than a mother, a sister, and a mentor. A person who gave us immense and warm love. Someday, we hope to return love to others, like she did. First, to guide our children towards a bright life. All right, let's keep up the good work today.